CBS News political contributor and host of the Article One podcast, Molly Hooper, is with us now to break down what's been happening and what we can expect today. So, Molly, what progress, if any, have been made on these stimulus talks since yesterday? And I mean, I know that a lot of people aren't feeling that confident, but anything's possible. What do you expect today?
Anything is possible. I think that when it comes to the big sticking points, the leaders, Democrats and Republicans, have moved past that. And really what they're dealing with is, it doesn't seem like $120 billion is small to regular Americans, but in the context of this package, dealing with smaller items, $17 billion for Save Our Stages, the Restaurants Act, not necessarily make or break items that need to be taken care of and ironed out before Congress passes this stimulus bill. And that could be, I've heard from several members, perhaps next week, possibly on Sunday. But it's just those last minute details that need to be taken care of. And I believe the best explanation that I heard from a senator recently was Senator Thune, the second ranking Republican, said that this is kind of like a game of whack-a-mole. It's like each time you whack one mole, another one pops up that you need to take care of. So right now they're just whacking the final moles that need to be, hammered out, and hopefully Congress will see something before the end of this weekend.
So a large portion of the money that's going to pay for this, that's supposed to pay for this, comes from unused money from the CARES Act. And a lot of that was supposed to go to the Federal Reserve for the Federal Reserve's lending program. The Federal Reserve has argued, the chairman has argued, they need that money. That money is set aside just in case the Fed has to jump in and help to sort of balance things out with the economy. Is there a concern, and I asked earlier this question, is there a concern that the Congress may be robbing Peter to pay Paul?
Well, here's the thing about that money. I think it's about $450 billion. That's money that was given to the Federal Reserve, so that they could loan it to these Main Street institutions, the Main Street lending program. And at a hearing last week, Secretary Mnuchin said here was the problem with that money. Small businesses were going to other lending facilities, lending institutions to borrow money because it was a lot cheaper, because the rates have been so low. So really, Secretary Mnuchin was arguing that the Fed does not need that extra reserve of funds available for loaning to businesses. This isn't like the Paycheck Protection Act. This is money that businesses would have to pay back, and they'd have to borrow it at a certain rate. So Pat Toomey, who's going to be the chairman if the Republicans hold on to the Senate, will be the chairman of the Banking Committee, says the Fed does not need that money. It just gives them too much power to do whatever they want with this tranche of money. And Democrats are arguing, well, but if you take this ability to lend that money away, then you're tying the hands of the Biden administration. So that is an issue that Pat Toomey is fighting on, but I'm not sure how big of a deal it is. I don't think that it's necessarily a make or break deal in terms of moving forward with this ostensibly second funding package for the CARES Act.
Molly, you heard in Nancy's piece that a provision called the Restaurant Act might get left out of the bill. Tell us why, tell us why that would happen, especially when there are so many small businesses like restaurants that are suffering or even closing. There's a narrative out there from a lot of conservative outlets that the journalists, the media has championed lockdowns, which is simply not true. I mean, the lockdowns are as advised by either governors or mayors, and oftentimes they're done in conjunction with the CDC and the Department of Health and Human Services. But I can tell you, and Anne-Marie and I have talked about this, Molly, you've talked about this with us, my heart breaks for every single restaurant that is not going to be able to survive this pandemic. And there are so many in my neighborhood alone that my wife and I walk by every day just hoping that they're able to come back, and they're not. And so no one wants to see this happen. So why would this provision be left out?
Well, okay, so this is $120 billion. And you're right, it's aimed at restaurants. This is one of those acts that it's like a backronym. It's called the Restaurants Act. And basically what it is the restaurants, the real economic support to fill out the rest of the name restaurants. But it's aimed specifically at restaurants. And I think that Republicans are arguing that even though it's not these restaurants' faults, it's the problem that these Republicans would call them liberal mayors and governors, are putting these draconian restrictions on restaurants from acting that really it's basically the Republicans don't want to enable what they would say would be draconian shutdowns. And so that's one of the reasons why they're fighting back on this. But keep in mind that with the $325 billion or so money available with the Paycheck Protection Act, restaurants can apply for that relief as well. And so that's why this hasn't been a make or break item, and it's a big chunk of money. But again, who knows? We may see this end up in an eventual package, because one thing is becoming clear: when Joe Biden, the incoming president-elect, says that this ostensibly $900 billion stimulus package is going to be a down payment, well, that would mean that the next Senate, the next Congress, would pass something bigger. However, if Republicans are in control of the Senate, Republicans are saying we're not going to do much more beyond that. And Democrats are saying, okay, well, we need to fight for everything we can in case this is not just a down payment, in case this is the big payment. And we can, try to get things later in another, next year. But really, they got to focus on pushing for whatever they can to get into this stimulus bill.
The thing about restaurants that makes, and they're not the only business, but particularly with restaurants, the PPP money had to go to paychecks. And a lot of these restaurants ended up spending additional money that they would have normally not spent to stay open. They put structures outside, maybe they had to buy takeout containers, and they were prohibited from spending some of the money that they received on all of this extra stuff because they had to spend it on paychecks. And I think that that's part of the reason why they're saying they kind of, they deserve or need a cutout when it comes to the stimulus bill, but they're probably not the only business that found themselves in a similar situation. That being said, right, the government will shut down if the funding isn't passed by midnight. That's like a whole other thing. Where do negotiations stand on that?
Well, negotiations, this has been a big year, hasn't it? To say the least. Basically, what's happening right now is they're on the 1 yard line, as Mitch McConnell would say, and the big $1.4 trillion funding bill that will keep government in the green, essentially, throughout the next year, that is pretty much done. But again, lawmakers and leaders want to tie that to the stimulus package to make sure that they get enough votes to pass both. So what's happening is right now, today, this morning, the leaders will decide whether they need to pass a sort of maybe 1 or 2 or 3 day stopgap funding measure just to keep a continuing resolution of sorts to keep the government funded through the next few days while they work out the final details on this stimulus package. But we'll hear more about that later today. Lawmakers are expected to be in town through the weekend and into early next week in order to pass these measures. But really, the big sticking point again is that $900 million stimulus bill. And that's one thing that leaders are getting close to approving, but again, those moles keep coming up that they need to whack, and that's what's going to be happening today and tomorrow.
All right, Molly Hooper, always great to have you, Molly. Thank you very much.
Great to, thank you.
All right, so up ahead,